My Erere Kawana Te Awa Tipua is a proverb from my river people. It says, and it means, I am the river and the river is me. And it refers to, when we say that, we are people from the Wanganui River, which is in the central part of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And that is a marker for our other tribes who know that proverb, that whakatauki, comes from the Wanganui River. So in our way, this is how we begin our kōrero. We introduce ourselves, we mihi to the people who have sustained us and fed us and looked after us during this time, and before we begin our kōrero. So ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. I'm just going to talk briefly, introduce our research project. So our research project is called Te Manaki o Te Marae, and it's a research project about homelessness and suitable housing for our people. In 2016, Te Puʻuhuluhulu marae, which is a marae in Auckland, and it's quite closely connected to ihu mātau, and the issues at ihu mātau are very similar to the issues that Te Puia have. So in 2016, when our national government said to the nation, we do not have a homeless issue. This little marae, tiny marae, with a tiny group of people who we call them haukainga, so people who look after the marae, people from that land. They opened their doors to the homeless in Auckland, and on their first day they got over 200 people, and then for the continuing 2 weeks they got more than 200 people. So they had lots and lots of homeless people, our whānau, coming from all over Auckland because they had no home and they were living very fragile and vulnerable lives, and they needed some respite. They needed somewhere where they could have shelter, somewhere where they could just re-energise, recalibrate, and be able to build themselves up again. And that was Te Puia marae. So Te Puia marae outed the government, embarrassed the government, and in doing that set into play what was to become quite a big kaupapa in our country around how do we address two things: homelessness, which is a growing phenomenon on the streets, and then housing, because we have a major shortage of housing in our country. But I do want to say that prior to people being homeless on the street, our people, Maori people, we have incurred landlessness since the 1860s. So the original homeless people are our people, because as you know, without land, without a place to stand, without whenua to be able to nurture you and your whānau and your hapu and your iwi, to be able to nurture your ohana and your tribe, you need to be able to stand on your land. And in 1863, in Waikato in particular, which is South Auckland, south towards Hamilton and beyond, in 1863, Governor Grey at the time said to the Waikato people, pledge your allegiance to Queen Victoria or we will take your land. And the Waikato people didn't, and their land was confiscated. And there was a battle in South Auckland that is a traumatic memory for that particular tribe. So, and that particular issue around being landlessness has occurred to all the tribes on our in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So the first tribes to be had their land confiscated was actually Ngāropi's people in Taranaki, and then after that were all the other tribes of Aotearoa. So we're looking at in our research, we give context to the historical understanding of what does it mean for Maori to be homeless. Well, for Maori, it's to be landless, to not know where your people came from, to not have a place to stand, to not be able to stand and say, you know, Ruapehu te maunga, Wanganui te awa, Ruapehu is my mountain, Wanganui is the river, to not have those cultural, physical benchmarks to say, I am from here, these are my tribal regions. So we take the notion of landlessness for our people and we bring it into a modern day context. We have this extraordinary growth in our country, which is the homeless issue. And our people suffer the most from that, because as a result of colonisation, which impacted here as well, we know, we have been on an endless battle for the 200 years to reclaim our language, to reclaim our land, to reclaim our maunga, to reclaim our cultural practices, to reclaim and retain. So I'm just going to move forward. So that's the historical context. In our project Te Manaki o Te Marae, what we as Māori researchers, community researchers, went to the Te Puʻuhuluhulu Marae, and so I was one of the principal investigators for the research, and the other one is Professor Jenny Lee Morgan, and she is from those people. So because she was from those people, we went to that marae and said we would like to develop a research, and a kaupapa Māori research, which is our active research and action research practice, kaupapa Māori research practice, which was to tell their story, to tell the story of what happened on that marae when they became, when they said, opened their doors to the homeless and said, haramai, you are welcome, come. So we have spent 2 years on this project, and this project has looked at the way in which cultural practices in the marae can hold people in crisis, our vulnerable people, and actually give them respite and give them a chance to breathe and to feel safe, but most importantly to be a family, to bring together this notion of being ohana. And then in that marae setting where we are governed by our own tikanga practices, the marae, so the marae is our physical whare house where we take our, where we practice our culture. So for those who don't know, we do everything in the marae. We have birthdays, we have weddings. We also, most importantly, we take our dead to the marae, and for 3 days we grieve with them, we sit with them, and we go through a ritual of sending them on. So it's a 3-day practice. So that's the marae in its basic sense. Introduce our research project. So our research project is called Te Manaki o Te Marae, and it's a research project about homelessness and suitable housing for our people. In 2016, Te Puʻuhuluhulu Marae, which is a marae quite closely connected to ihu mātau, and the issues at ihu mātau are very similar to the issues that Te Puʻuhuluhulu have. So in 2016, when our national government said to the nation, we do not have a homeless issue, this little marae, and without whenua to be able to nurture you and your whānau and your hapu and your iwi, to be able to nurture your ohana and your tribe, you need to be able to stand on your land. And in 1863, in Waikato in particular, which is South Auckland, south towards Hamilton and beyond, in 1863, Governor Grey at the time said to the Waikato people, pledge your allegiance to Queen Victoria or we will take your land. and the Waikato people didn't, and their land was confiscated. And there was a battle in South Auckland that is a memory, a traumatic memory for that particular tribe. So, and that particular issue around being landlessness has occurred to all the tribes on our in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So the first tribes to be had their land confiscated was actually Ngāropi's people in Taranaki, and then after that were all the other tribes of Aotearoa. So we're looking at the in our research we give context to the historical understanding of what does it mean for Maori to be homeless. Well, for Maori it's to be landless, to not know where your people came from, to not have a place to stand, to not be able to stand and say, you know, Ruapehu te maunga, Wanganui tawa, Ruapehu is my mountain, Wanganui is the river, to not have those cultural, physical benchmarks to say, I am from here, these are my tribal regions. So we take the notion of landlessness for our people and we bring it into a modern day context. We have this extraordinary growth in our...
Kia ora tātou. I guess want to talk briefly about Indigenous placemaking and how we might begin to reimagine a world where we shape our own environments. We shape our own responses to our needs, our educational needs, our medical needs, our housing needs, our cultural, our spiritual needs. Because in colonized countries, what has occurred is Eurocentric planning approaches have created the framework for our lives. More than that, Eurocentric planning processes and housing policies have created the actual boxes that we are put in. And the work that we are trying to pursue with our research is to say, how do we reimagine a world where we create our own places, our own cultural landscapes? How do we begin to respond to our own family dynamics or hana dynamics in a way which is not just about fitting into someone else's box that has been provided for you? And in Aotearoa, after World War II, when we began to move and be lured and legislated into the cities to become the labour force for the growing towns and cities, we had no control over the housing that we entered into. And hence we suffered from our cultural needs not being met within those housing environments. Our notions of tapu and noa, the way that we separate food, the way we separate ablutions, the way we separate out laundry, all of those things were pushed into this single box. And we were, over successive generations from World War II, colonized again by the houses that we were living in. So progressively we had to let go of those sensitivities around what was correct. We had to try and make do with an overcrowded situation because we had no physical control over the rental accommodation that we were provided with, and even the homes that we eventually bought. We had no physical control over those environments. We came from developments just like this. We came from clustered villages where smaller dwellings were clustered in family groupings, hapu groupings. We had our kai, our eating areas separate. Over there we had our ablutions where we washed the body, where we went to the toilet, well over here. We managed to keep our cultural worldview intact when we had control over our physical environments. So moving fast forward into 2019, the work that we've been doing at Te Puia Memorial Marae is reimagining how we might look at the provision of shelter, provision of housing, provision of homes in a marae environment, which does not start from the standpoint of the Western box that we're all also familiar with. So we've developed 7 different types of housing from what we might call a tiny house, a Maori version of a tiny house, right through to a multi-level development. But all of them take seriously our cultural requirements around tapu and noa, the dynamics of our family situations where we have more adults per family, we have more children per family, we have more cars, we have more animals, we have more dramas, we have more of everything. And so we need environments which can actually begin to respond to our social realities. So that's the kaupapa of the work that we're doing. In our second book, we'll be focusing on those different typologies, and they'll be coming out on the 13th of September when we go back to Te Puia Marae to launch that project. So that's a brief kōrero on what we might be able to do in our own communities in re-looking at our cultural landscapes, the way that we choose to provide shelter for each other and for our whānau. And the first step is to look back to your history. How did we live 1, 2, 3 generations ago? That will tend to tell you what is good for you. Where you have come from is generally going to be good for you, because culture doesn't change in 1, 2, 3 generations. Culture is within us, and we carry it with us. So the next process would be, once you've looked at your own history of your own indigenous housing, is then to say, what are the principles, what are the core principles that we want to imbue within our housing developments? And they will vary from iwi to iwi, from people to people. What are the key principles that you want to embody in those developments? And then let them guide the way you design your physical environments. The thing not to do is never start from a box. Never start from a box and look at where you can fit yourselves into that. Start from the land. The whenua will speak to you about where is the right place to do this, where is the right place to do that, and how can you come together? What facilities do you need to bring large groups together? How do you welcome wider family? How do you let them stay for periods of time where they can be comfortable? How do you allow for relatives who are coming out of prison staying for a period of time? Elderly people who have very serious health needs. And so it's really what you'd call, from an architectural perspective, designing from first principles, and they are our own principles. So it's a looking back and a relearning, and then approaching the design of our physical environments so that they really begin to acknowledge our holistic cultural, physical, social, environmental needs in the most nourishing way possible. So that's a short form version of the processes that we're going through in Aotearoa, and we teach at, many of us teach at the schools of architecture in Aotearoa, so we're trying to recalibrate the way that our next generations of architects approach design, so that they can, whatever race they are, they can be designing from an Aotearoa perspective. They can design from that whenua, from the whenua to the people. So, kia ora mai tātou. We're going to pass on around here, but if there are any questions, we'll answer them first. But Waikarere has got a pūrākau that she'd like to share with us. She began sharing it today, and she just got to the punchline of taupiri, one of our most well-known and sacred maunga in Aotearoa. And so if there's any pātai, we can talk to them.
Questions? Any questions?
Have you heard of or visited Puʻuhuluhulu Waianae on Oahu? It's kind of like its own community in Waianae, and they've kind of created a community based and you know, separated it based on these kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's an amazing,
Kia
and
ora.
it's used as a case study now for other houseless communities on all the islands.
Tomorrow we're going to Ma'o Farms in Waianae. So tomorrow I'm facilitating a workshop with the young people there. So we have been very inspired by what's happening in Waianae and Ma'o in particular, and we're looking forward to working with the Kukui and Kamuela Enos and others, and just seeing where we can support the way they're beginning to look at the new land that they have purchased, and the kōrero that's been given so far is trying to be like our navigator ancestors, trying to see the island and then pull the island closer to us. So in the case there, what does the whenua look like in your mind, in your dreams, and then how can you pull that closer to the people? So kia ora.
Kia ora, everybody. I've kind of was just sitting there thinking, you know, we've just got the post-feast slump, and I thought, how are we going to do this? And kind of just like get some, and and I think if I just vary my movements and vary my actions and my pitch and my tone, I might be able to keep you awake for 5 minutes. So earlier this morning I started on a story, and I actually did that much backfilling that I didn't get to the beginning proper. So I won't tell you about the mountains that fought for the love of a beautiful mountain who played them all off and against each other. Won't talk about that one. But the principal mountain, the alpha mountain who won that battle, Tongariro, is in our central plateau in New Zealand, and that's our desert road. So I don't know if you know this, but we have snow and a desert, like on the same place. And I'm going to talk about taupiri who grew up with Tongariro. So Tongariro's in the central plateau, it's volcanic, it's at quite a high altitude, it's about the same height as Mauna Kea, you were saying, eh? No. A little bit smaller? Yeah. Bigger? Smaller, lower. Okay, it's lower. It's beautiful. The army do their drills there as well. And so taupiri grew up with Tongariro. They did what everybody does when you're young. You play, you wreck things, you break things, you get told off, you know, you learn. And when she grew to be a beautiful, beautiful mountain, and she shifted quite some distance into the Waikato area, which is where I'm from. So that's about an hour and a half south of Auckland, our big city. And she was quite happy there. She lived there for a wee while. She had a little mountain called Taupiri Kuao, which Kuao was a cub, okay, a baby. More for animals, not so much people. People are peepees. So Taupiri had Taupiri Kuao, but she grew desperately lonely and homesick and lovesick for her kāinga, her ohana. She grew so unwell that her people were worried. They were actually really worried that she might not make it. That's how unwell she became. And I guess that tells us that if we're not near our family and we don't have a connection to our family, it can make us unwell. And her family, for her, were the Mauna. And so what she talked with her people, and they decided that what they needed to do was to send a message back to Tongariro and say, she's unwell, you need to come and see her. Now this is the big maunga, like it's one of our biggest. The get up and go style that they had prior to, they sort of stopped doing that. And so they sent a pononga, which is like our go-do, our not quite, gopher, go and do it, a servant. She sent the servant to Tongariro with the message that she needed to see him. No. And the trusted person, not just your, like, oh, geez, I'm free, I'm out, I'm not coming back. Like a trusted person. And he went with a dog Okay, so picture your cutest, most adorable, beautiful dog with no ears. Okay, the dog that doesn't kind of like to listen when they're little puppy stage. He went with his dog and he did the long trip, quite a long trip. It's at least 3 hours by car, and arrived at Tongariro, and they had the most resplendent, for a servant, a resplendent pōwhiri, kind of like what we had today. He was greeted officially, he was fed, he was bathed, and he sat down and he said, it's taupiri, she's unwell, she needs your help. And what Tongariro did was to bring up some of that water that had been already sent here from Hawaii, and that was the water that had revived ngā toro oirangi or I oirangi. So when he went up to do the priestly thing to get messages from the other side, he nearly passed away, and he did a prayer to his sisters in Hawaii, who then sent him the healing water. So these are the hot waters sent from Hawaii. So Tongariro took some of that water and gave it to the pononga to take back to taupiri, which he did. Took the water. Now the water was going to follow. That's all he had to do, was follow the pononga. Now, Waikato River, we have a river. Oh, I'm jumping ahead. So the pononga, straight back home, that was the message. Talk to him, see what can happen, come straight home. He went straight, started to head straight home, and the river was following the dog. And so the dog would go this way and the river would follow, and the dog would go that way to Hatepe and the dog would follow. So rather than having a straight line river, we've got this river that goes like this. And we call that river the Waikato River. And on every bend, so we make good with what we have, right? On every bend we put a kāinga, a home and a chief. And so Waikato River is known for Waikato tani wharau. He peko, he tani wharau. So on every bend there is a chief. Not a goblin, maybe a kaitiaki, a spiritual guardian, okay, on every river. So it's a metaphor, but in old times there actually were homes there. And so the dog and the river and the pononga following them went back home and arrived to see taupiri, who drank of the water and was instantly revived. Okay, it's simple as that. The water had come from Tongariro, her hometown, or her home base, and it revived her. The river carried on, because it didn't need to stay there, it needed to get out. And it goes out actually in Tuako, which is close to where you guys live. No, okay, never mind. The message that for me here is that if you are connected in some way to your kāinga, to your ohana, wherever it may be in the world, that can be enough. Okay, so when you're not well and you can't get there, but something can come to you, then that can be enough. Okay, that's the end of my story. Thank you.
Toro mai tō ringa ki a hauriru, tia ki o ringa i a whi pono i a whi taku tinana. Aue te aroha ki a rātou mā. Aue te aroha ka whakaroto nei. Hiki tia hinga iwi ki a rewa ki runga. Nā taonga nā matua kua maro ki te pō. Aue te aroha ki a rātou mā. Aue te aroha nau whakaroto nei. Kia ora rā.
Kia ora. Tā wai nei. Kia ora.